of the questions I get all the time from people that are relocating to the area is, why is Palm Bay so much cheaper than Melbourne? As they look online at places like Zillow and Realtor.com, they notice that for a $400,000 house in Melbourne, you can get seemingly the same house in Palm Bay for $350,000. And their question every time is why? So I wanted to take a few minutes to break down why Palm Bay is so much cheaper than Melbourne, and to see if that trade-off is something that that's worth doing for you. I know I knew all these things before I moved to Palm Bay. I'm born and raised in Melbourne, and now I live in Palm Bay. And it was all worth it for me, and it might not be for you. So if you're new to the area or you've never been to the area, I just wanted to break down really the 5 reasons why Palm Bay is cheaper than Melbourne. First, I want to talk about what I mean by cheaper. Price per square foot is a good point to start. For the most part, you're going to have a similar sized lot in Palm Bay and in Melbourne. And so I wanted to talk about, if you're looking at an 1,800 square foot house here versus an 1,800 square foot house here, what's the difference in cost? Across the last 6 months, I just pulled up the data, across the last 6 months, the price per square foot is 16.9% less in Palm Bay than it is in Melbourne. So it's about right to say that, yeah, $400,000 house in Melbourne is going to cost about $350,000 in Palm Bay. So let's break down why. Reason number 1 is the proximity to the beaches. One of the main reasons people pick our area on the Space Coast is because it is so close to the beach. It's the Space Coast. And if you don't know the area, you might not know that it's split into 2 sections. There's a beachside area that's right along the Atlantic, and then it's split into 2 by the Indian River. And so most of the time, if you're living on the mainland, actually every time if you're living on the mainland, you've got to go over a bridge to get to the beachside area before you can go to the beach. And so in Melbourne, there are 3 causeways that get you from one side to the other. And in Palm Bay, there aren't any. So in most places in Palm Bay, you're driving up to Melbourne to get over to Melbourne Beach or in the Atlantic to get to the beach, or you're driving down to Sebastian to do the same thing down in Vero Beach. But either way, most of the time that you're in Melbourne, you're a 15, maybe 20-minute drive to the beach. And in Palm Bay, it's rare to be closer than 30 minutes away from the beach. So that's the main reason. That's one of the main reasons that Palm Bay is cheaper than Melbourne. The second reason that Palm Bay is cheaper than Melbourne is because there's less development. Melbourne is a more established area, and of all the land available in Palm Bay, only 40% has been developed. And so because there's less out there, right? If you go to Melbourne, you can drive through and see it's an established city, see the stores that have been there for a long time, the restaurants that have been there for a long time, the neighborhoods that have been there for a long time. And while there is some of that in Palm Bay, there are neighborhoods that have been there for a while. Most of it is either recently developed or being developed now. Only 40% being used means that there's a lot of room for growth there. And you'd be living through some new construction. You'd be living through places opening and closing and then opening as a new place. And so that's just one of the trade-offs of living in Palm Bay. It's why it's cheaper, is because it is less developed. Now, this is one that I don't think is talked about as often, but there's just a lot of competition in Palm Bay. Because it's only 40% developed, that means that there's a lot of land that's being developed right now, which means lots of builders, from local builders to national builders, all buying land and building houses in Palm Bay. And what that means for the common homeowner is that there's kind of a ceiling on what your house can be worth. If you've got an 1,800 square foot house that's worth $300,000, but somebody can go build a brand new 1,800 square foot house for $320, and they're going to have their interest rate bought down, they might look at that. And so the prices that the builders charge kind of put a ceiling on what values can do in Palm Bay. And as that happened over time, houses in Palm Bay were cheaper than in Melbourne. In Melbourne, there aren't many new construction options apart from Viera and some other higher end neighborhoods. It's very rare to get a starter home being built in Melbourne right now, where in Palm Bay, there's tons of them. And so it keeps the values lower because it's the prices that the builders charge are causing a ceiling. The flip side of that is if you're moving to Palm Bay, you have a lot more options. You can buy a house in an area that's already established, or you can build in a brand new neighborhood, or you can build a house in an area that's already established on one of the lots that hadn't been built on, because there are several. It's neither good nor bad. It's more of just the reason why it's less expensive than Melbourne. Now, this fourth reason is going to be really important to some people and not important at all to others. It's the fact that there's less infrastructure. In Melbourne, almost everybody is on city water and almost everybody is on city sewer. And in Palm Bay, they haven't built all the infrastructure to have city water and city sewer in every neighborhood. So there's a lot of people who live on well water. That's where they get their drinking water. And there's a lot of people who live on septic. That's what gets flushed down. And so, if you want to have a more established infrastructure and be in city water and be in city sewer, Melbourne tends to be the more obvious choice. Now, there's plenty of options with city water and city sewer in Palm Bay. It tends to be, and this is just a general use case, that the further north you are in Palm Bay, the more likely you are to have city water. And the further north you are in Palm Bay, the more likely you are to have city sewer. Now, as they've expanded their infrastructure and given homeowners the opportunity to access city water, they've kind of built it from east to west. So in Southeast Palm Bay, you're more likely to have city water than you are in Southwest Palm Bay. And that's kind of the long-term plan, is to keep it growing. Now, one of the other points about infrastructure is about the roads. If you haven't been to Palm Bay in the last 5 years, you know that it has a reputation of having potholes and roads that were paved in the 60s and 70s and just not maintained very well because the area wasn't built up as fast as everybody thought it would. Now, a few years ago, they passed the Palm Bay Roads Project, a $150 million development to repave every road in Palm Bay and to take better care of the roads going forward. Yes, it raised our taxes a little bit, but no real higher than it is in Melbourne. And the good thing is that all of our roads have been repaved. My road was repaved less than a year ago, and beforehand it was a little bumpy. Now, I'm very happy with it. I'm happy to pay more taxes to have a better city. But it does have a reputation. Palm Bay has had the reputation of not having good infrastructure. And even though they're doing much better now about building it, it's a lag for values to come up and adjust to it. So if you look at Palm Bay infrastructure or Palm Bay roads, you're going to find people complaining about it. And it's a good thing that values haven't gone up yet, because you can buy at a better opportunity than it's going to be in a few years when the area is more developed and more people know how great it is. This fifth and final reason was really the hardest reason for me to move to Palm Bay personally. I knew all these things before moving here, and it was still difficult, having been born and raised in Melbourne and being used to a certain lifestyle, moving down to Palm Bay. The difficult thing is that there's not a ton to do in Palm Bay itself. Of that 40% number, that 40% that has been developed, 92% of it is residential. That is astronomically high for most cities or municipalities or whatever you want to call them. It means that almost everything is a house. And so 8% of the city is a combined between all of the hospitals, all of the restaurants, all of the strip malls, all of the movie theaters. Anything to do is only 8% of the city. And so what you'll find is that more often than not, and I don't mean to say that there aren't great things to do in Palm Bay. I live there and love it there. More often than not, you're driving up to Melbourne to do most things, to go on a date night, to go bowling, to do whatever you'd be doing in your day-to-day life. You're driving up to Melbourne. Now, a lot of this video might seem like it's being negative, and I don't mean for that to be the case. I just know that, having been born and raised in this area, that a lot of times people come from out of state not knowing what our area is, maybe having driven it once or only seen it through pictures online. And I know that before I moved to Palm Bay, I had to struggle with all these things and see what is the most important thing to me. And for me to save $50,000 to $75,000 on my house, I was willing to drive 10 minutes further to go bowling or to go to a movie theater. I'm fine living on well water because I have a water softener system and I take good care of it. I'm also not really much of a beach goer. So a 30-minute drive to the beach 4 or 5 times a year compared to a 20-minute drive to the beach didn't really affect me all that much. All I want to do with this video is give you the information for you to make your best choice. If you're hearing these things and you say, I'd absolutely never live there, that's fine. Look in Melbourne, look in Rockledge, look in any of the areas in the Space Coast that are more well-known and more loved. That's fine. Now, if you look at all of these things and say, hey, you know what? I don't mind driving 10 minutes further if it means that I can save $50,000 on my house. Or, hey, it's actually a good thing for me that the area is not as developed because that means it's going to be a little bit quieter. Or it's a good thing that it's not as developed because that means that when it develops, my home value might go up faster than it would in Melbourne. Any of these things are fine. My goal here is to share as much information with you so you can make the right choice for you and your family. Now, with all that being said, if you're moving to the Space Coast, whether it's Melbourne or Palm Bay or any of our surrounding cities, and you want to have a conversation about what's the best fit for you, I'd be honored to have that conversation with you. One of the things I love to do is make my hometown your home too. If you have any general questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll either address them there or I'll make a video in response. If you have specific questions that you don't want shared publicly, the best way to reach me is by text at 321-626-8553. If this was helpful, I'd appreciate it if you take the 3 seconds to like the video. And if you know somebody moving to the area who's considering either Palm Bay or Melbourne, I'd love if you'd share this with them. Until next time, I've been Michael Heisenbuttle. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me and have a blessed rest of your day.